When the deep space arrays woke that morning, they found a shadow where nothing should be, and the technicians who first saw it paused with cold fingers on warm consoles because the thing on the display did not match any ship in the archives. The shape was a wide, slow curve that drifted like an island against the black, and its sweep broke every expectation of design anyone had taught their children. It had no registry lights, no trade glyphs, no signature of a maker. The star maps around it were calm, the lanes were clear, and radios hummed with ordinary news until the arrays named the object with a single, stunned word, carrier. News feeds that run across 3 armed systems and 9 languages clogged and then fell silent, and the Galactic Council sent envoys with crisp suits and colder words because there are rules for fleets and rules for war, but there had never been a rule for something this large that appeared out of a private system with no transponder. In the human sector the sight was not a surprise, it was a proud answer. Months earlier, in deep bays beneath a planet that had once been nearly empty of hope, engineers had argued with rust and secrecy and smuggled steel into orbit. They had worked past embargoes and ridicule and long nights of welding that smelled like burned breath and old oil, and they had built something so large that it forced old maps to be redrawn. They called the carrier Leviathan because the name felt like a promise and because humans have always liked big, blunt names that tell the truth. When the Leviathan opened its hull, the cameras caught a simple emblem painted near the ramp, a crude tree with roots braced as if against a wind, and the sight made some ambassadors laugh in a small, helpless way and made others lean forward with questions that did not yet have answers. The council debated in slow, formal circles, and its jurists wanted papers and inspection, and its soldiers wanted lasers and tests, but the Leviathan did not wait for the law to catch up because it did not come as a weapon and it did not come to beg. It unlatched a single bay and sent a small craft that moved like someone who knows the tide, and the craft did not roar or threaten, but it did not lower itself either. It opened a channel and showed a child who had grime on his elbows and a tool in his hands and a smile that was oddly brave for someone who had seen too many nights without enough light. The message the child carried was not written in the council's many tongues, but somehow every person listening felt the meaning: we are here, and we will not be taken for granted. Inside the Leviathan hold, people cried and stitched fresh flags and checked the old engines, and their captain watched the council's faces on cold screens and made a choice that is only made by people who have tried 100 failures. He said, quietly, "Show them a human trick." The small craft released a net of tiny drones that at first looked like a swarm of fireflies and then snapped into ordered shapes and unfolded boxes of water and seeds and small machines that fixed broken things. For the Council's war advisors, the drones were a threat. For hungry worlds, the drones were hope. When a council admiral demanded words, the human leader answered with a simple video of ruined neighborhoods being cleared, of doctors working with hands that did not tremble, and of farmers teaching children to plant on the metal decks of the Leviathan. The video did not boast. It only invited. The council could not decide if this was a bluff or a new kind of diplomacy. Meanwhile, a shadow moved in the carrier's maintenance bays where old codes and new ideas meet, because people who have nothing to lose often invent tools that look like tricks to those who have everything. Engineers had built a way to make surfaces go gray for a breath, to hide a hull from a beam for minutes, to slip a convoy past a watchful eye. They called it an invisible line because it let things move like a quiet animal through tall grass. The council's sensors noticed small anomalies and called them accidents, and the press called them miracles, and across neutral feeds the public began to pick a side because humans were showing not only power but mercy. Then a saboteur struck a cargo farm on the Leviathan and set racks of food to smoke, and the human crew did not fire back. They ran into the flames and pulled council technicians from collapsing platforms and handed them oxygen and bandages and blankets, and the footage of aliens saved by humans spread faster than the council's cautions. In the council chamber, votes shifted like weather. Some members urged trade and treaties, seeing the chance of new allies who mend and build. Others hardened, smelling the danger of a people who could hide as easily as they could help. The Leviathan's captain listened to diplomats who spoke in old laws and to soldiers who spoke in old fears, and he understood both. He also understood that fear and law are slower than life-saving when a convoy is sinking. When the small human boat left the Leviathan to cross neutral space toward the Council cruiser, many watched with pulses quick as drum beats. The boat moved steady and unafraid. The Council flanked it with steel and questions. The humans offered water and a joke about soup and the repair of engines. As they drew near the cruiser, a quiet alarm on the Council console beeped and then went dead, and the same technicians who had seen the shadow recorded one more odd thing before the connection shuddered. A tiny emblem flashed on the Leviathan's feet and then the screens showed nothing but a child's face and the word "We are here." The cameras held that face until the signal stuttered, and then silence filled the room like a held breath, and every listener felt that history was not a slow thing tonight but a quick and honest measure, and the Leviathan waited for the Council to blink. The small human craft moved across neutral space like a stubborn boat through fog, slow and steady and with people inside who spoke in plain words and held simple gifts, and when it docked beside the Council cruiser the air in the visitor bay tasted of old metal and new hope because the Council had come prepared with protocol and questions and the humans had come with water, seed packs, and the kind of jokes that make strangers relax for a moment. The Council's envoys wore faces carved by law, their questions were precise: who paid for the Leviathan, who commanded it, what right did humans have to build such a thing without Council notice? The humans answered with stories instead of papers. A leader with a pale burn across her hand and a steady voice said they built because their cities had fallen and because children had to learn to plant in ash. She spoke of nights when light was a rumor and of hands that learned to fix old engines with rope and faith. She did not beg, she explained. She showed videos of crews teaching farmers to grow food in metal holds and of doctors who set broken bones with tools sewn from scavenged metal. When an admiral leaned forward and asked if the Leviathan had weapons, the leader did not shout. She opened a case and showed small machines that repaired hull breaches and drones that carried doctors and blankets. She did not hide a capability, but she also did not wear a uniform of power. The Council watched, counting treaties and histories in their heads, and some diplomats found their hearts moving toward trade and help because the humans offered something the Council had been slow to give: practical aid, not grand promises. Yet not everyone on the Council could see mercy without seeing danger. Where one hand offers bread, another hand thinks of the crumbs that tell where a boot will step. A faction of older members remembered wars and hidden weapons. They remembered times when new fleets meant new rules and new masters. They argued for caution and for inspections that would peel the Leviathan like an onion until nothing was left to surprise them. At the same time, a small, secret group in the Council whispered in darker rooms and wrote memos that smelled of fear, and they began to plan how to make the public believe the humans were a threat before the humans could be properly known. The humans, for their part, moved among Council officers with the open skill of people who had to share tools to survive. They fixed a sensor dish at the far end of the cruiser because the crew there had not had time to find a spare bolt. They gave the technician water and a small seed pod and a short lesson in how to grow a plant under harsh light. Cameras caught the hands of the technician and of the human meeting, and the footage went across feeds like wind across a dry plain. Public opinion shifted in hours. Then a saboteur struck the Leviathan's cargo farm in the dead of their night and set hydroponic racks to smoke. The alarm flashed like a heartbeat and the human crew poured from their decks without guns, carrying fire suppressors and clamps and the soft authority of people who had learned to rescue with what they had. They pulled Council technicians from collapsing platforms and wrapped them in blankets and showed the galaxy how relentless kindness could be a tool as sharp as any blade. The video of aliens saved by human hands moved votes and softened faces, and some Council members who had been ready to demand the Leviathan's surrender found themselves speaking of partnership instead. But the secret group had not given up. They fed edited clips and false reports to old networks, and those images fed suspicion where once there had been curiosity. The Council could not make its mind, so it took the safe path of procedure and called for an inspection fleet, a line of cruisers chosen to check the carrier and verify every claim. The Council issued a formal warning that said dock for inspection or be boarded under Council law, and that decision satisfied lawyers and soldiers alike because it promised control and kept the story in the right rooms. The human captain and his council in the Leviathan met the order with the kind of quiet a people learn when they must choose between pride and survival. They prepared to show the inspectors every ledger and tool and to open their holds, but they also prepared another thing, a measured defensive system built not to kill but to protect. A set of measures that could confuse censors and keep people alive long enough to answer questions with facts rather than fear. This system was the result of hard nights and clever hands, the kind of thing made by people who must hide a convoy from pirates or a mother from a storm. As both sides readied, diplomats in neutral channels tried to broker more time and a face-to-face where trust could grow. The public watched, the council argued, and the Leviathan's crew kept their faces calm. Then, at the moment when neutral space should have been a corridor for inspection, the council's code that called an inspection fleet to jump home lit up and the fleet disappeared into the faster lanes. They were the right ships with the right orders and the right faces, and they were meant to arrive and show that law still worked. But one ship did not come back when it should have. The waiting screens first displayed a delay, then a cross signal, then raw sensor noise, and the council room filled with a cold that felt like a wrong answer. People leaned toward consoles and counted seconds like prayers. On the Leviathan the captain saw the change and his crew felt the old hard tug of fear and of something else, the knowledge that when a thing vanishes in neutral space it asks questions only action can answer, and everyone watching understood that the next message might be law, or it might be war, and the small craft in the dark waited as signals flickered and one council ship held its breath and did not re-emerge. When the inspection fleet failed to return on the schedule the council expected, rumor became worry and worry became a quiet anger because war fleets do not simply vanish and mistakes are costly in neutral space, and then a battered freighter slipped into the Leviathan's sensor halo like a ghost with its paint eaten away in strange patches and its hull scored but still breathing, and people began to point fingers and ask whether the humans had done something unseen. The ships that watched the Leviathan could not agree on a word for what they feared, some called it trickery, some called it genius, and some called it a crime against the idea of open lanes, and that fear looked for proof in small things, a freighter's faded emblem, a burst of static on a long-range feed, a smear on a sensor where nothing should be. On the Leviathan the engineers smiled without showing all of their teeth and called the invention the invisible line because it made a surface stop being noticed for a few minutes, like a fish slipping under a wave where the net cannot reach. It was not a weapon the way a cannon is a weapon. It did not blow things up. It changed the rules of sight, and rules that change quickly make old empires nervous. The invisible line worked by folding light and adjusting reflected heat for a breath, by sending back sensor noise that looked like empty vacuum, and by timing the trick with a human patience that knew when to move and when to wait. The council soldiers feared what they could not aim at and the scholars feared what they could not prove, so a small team of council scientists sailed to the Leviathan under a flag of study and not of war. They came with notebooks and sharp eyes and long memories. They asked to see diagrams and to learn the math. The human engineer who led the project, an old woman whose hands still smelled of grease, showed them the line's code and its small, careful limits. She showed how it could cloak a convoy for a few minutes so refugees could slip past a blockade, and how it could hide a hydroponic farm from a solar flare until the crops could be brought back into safety. She refused, in calm words, to teach them how to bend the line into a weapon that could hide missiles or hide an attack, because she had seen what weapons did to her own streets and she had no wish to help make that past repeat. Some scientists listened with hungry curiosity and left with notebooks full of questions. Some left with new friends. Others left and reported to ears that wanted power more than answers. Inside the Leviathan a young deckhand whose nights were full of small repairs and long coffee cups intercepted a coded call meant for a council patrol ship. He did not tell anyone at first because secrets live in the belly of ships like rats, but the message shook him enough to carry it to the captain, a quiet order to seize a distant colony accused of harboring human sympathizers, an order that would send soldiers and tribunals and maybe flames to a place that had never known war. The captain read the message and felt the weight of many things, the lives in the colony, the law that the council claimed to hold sacred, and the truth that sometimes law hides fear. He decided to act with the sort of choice only those who have learned to save will make. He gathered a small convoy of empty freighters, some food pallets, and families who had waited quietly in the Leviathan's lower decks because the humans there kept promises to their own. He called in a favor from an old engineer and had the line widen and hold just long enough to move the convoy past a patrol net, and they set their course like people who know the stars by heart. The Council's patrols saw something odd on their sensors and fired into the space where a ship should have been because the safest answer is often the loudest one. The fleet's beams swept the vacuum and punched holes into nothing. Screens showed bursts of fire that touched only empty dark. Then, as if the sky were playing an honest trick, the convoy reappeared near a quiet world whose governor had agreed to hide refugees. The people stepped down and hugged dirt that smelled like rain. The images of the vanished convoy and of the same convoy alive on a new world moved through feeds and through council rooms like a small revolution because mercy had beaten procedure for a moment. In the council chamber some members felt a new fear. The humans had crossed a line and had not fired a weapon, so what law should answer such a movement? Others felt the shame of old rules that failed to shelter the weak. The faction that wanted to punish the Leviathan grew loud and called for an emergency tribunal because courts can tear a thing apart in public and make an example. Lawyers wrote long lists of breaches and of precedents that supported control. Diplomats wrote quieter notes arguing for talks and treaties. Meanwhile, the small group that favored secrecy and power pushed news feeds full of fearful images and old stories. The public grew noisy and certain, and the strangers who had watched only for proof began to demand a verdict. The Leviathan's captain read the call for a tribunal and did not smile. He knew what courts could do and he knew what cameras could do in a world that loves a clear story. He prepared to bring his crew to the place where law meets public light and to answer for what they had done. However, before the tribunal opened its formal doors and before the judge could declare the charges, a surprise witness asked to speak, and the council paused because surprise witnesses carry new facts that old papers do not hold, and in a room where every vote mattered a single new image could tilt a balance. The witness stepped forward and placed a small, trembling drive on the table, and when the video played the chamber fell quiet, because it showed the Leviathan in the dark of another day holding a crippled council ship and its people from falling into space, because it showed humans cutting metal and handing oxygen and holding hands with those they had been ordered to fear, and in that stillness everyone felt how thin the line between law and life could be, and the tribunal prepared to open its mouth while the council watched the images again and tried to name what had happened and what must come next. The video of humans hauling council sailors from a burning hold spread like wildfire and split the galaxy into two clear moods. Some felt hope and some felt old fear, and the Leviathan rode that break like a ship in a strong current because across worlds people began to argue in new ways and old quarrels rose like smoke. On many quiet worlds the human's small axe bandaging an injured ambassador, leaving seed packs where famine had been made merchants and governors smile and open channels of trade. In ports and markets new offers came in, repair contracts, seed lines, and requests for training in the simple ways the Leviathan used to fix a hull or coax a crop to life on metal. The humans answered in their practical way. They taught, they traded, they repaired, and in return they earned friends who could slip food and parts through lanes that once had been closed to them. But the bright side slid into darker corners too, because memories of conquest run long and sharp. Species that had lived under council rule for generations remembered old bargains where aid came wrapped in control. For them, a human fleet that arrived with no papers and a lot of courage looked like a story that might end with someone else writing new rules over old worlds. The Leviathan's captain saw both hands of this coin and chose to act in the way his people understood best, not by shouting but by doing things that changed a life. A small group of starving colonies asked for help against a pirate ring that had taken food and fuel for years, and the humans agreed. They did not use guns to wipe the pirates away. Instead they used Leviathan's drones and nets to herd the raiders' skiffs into enclosures where the humans could talk without the smell of oil and gunpowder between them. They offered a choice: accept a trade deal and a patch of hard, usable land to grow on, or leave the lanes and find work elsewhere. The captured pirate crew watched as their skiffs were handed tools and seed pods and as their young were shown how to plant on scrub rock until the soil grew. Many chose the hard work, some few fled into lanes that no trader wanted. The pirates who stayed changed slowly but truly. They learned to mend engines and to harvest salt. They began to build instead of plunder, and soon a small community on a once barren rock produced more goods than it had ever stolen. The human methods won friends and also earned enemies. A faction inside the council that had always made deals in shadows wanted the old ways back. They saw the new pirate villages as tools to buy and the Leviathan's mercy as weakness to exploit. Quiet envoys offered bribes to a group of pirates who still remembered how to kill for a coin. When the Leviathan's captain learned of the bribe, he did not shout in a council chamber, he did what his people did best: he showed the proof. He published the messages and the accounts and the silent transfer of credits onto neutral feeds so that everyone could watch how old power tried to buy back what mercy had stolen. The evidence hit like a hard rain on a dry market. Members of the council who had protected the bribe felt their reputations crack. The public watched numbers and words and began to doubt the neat stories told by some older leaders. While politics burned hotter, a quieter kind of discovery took place in the Leviathan's engine rooms, where men and women worked with stubborn smiles and cups of black tea. A veteran engineer who had seen the carrier through more scrapes than anyone else sat at a console and followed a thread of code that looked like a mistake and then like a map. The code had a pattern he remembered from old council archives, a worm program used decades ago in a forgotten conflict to hide data and to nudge systems in ways no one now liked to admit. He felt a cold shake because programs carry histories and histories carry burdens. He pulled on the line and found more than an algorithm. He found a hidden handshake and notes in a dead language that named programs for weather change and for economic nudges, and under the rust of old files he found a ledger of stations where the council had experimented and sometimes failed. The ledger showed worlds that had been moved off lists, aid that had been redirected into secrecy, and a pattern of soft control where the council had once promised only protection. The veteran called his captain and laid the pieces on a table of light. Some on the Leviathan feared the truth would burn them with old enemies. Others said truth is a tool and must be used. The captain agreed that hiding nothing was the only honest way forward, and that if the council could hide programs that had hurt small worlds, the galaxy deserved to see them. The Leviathan's broadcast of the veterans' finds made different kinds of waves. Some council members, already pushed by the bribe scandal, demanded explanations and reforms. Others panicked and called for tribunals and for a quiet erasure of the leaks. Protests met petitions in many capitals, and small aid convoys found new volunteers. Yet as the voices rose, a secret committee within the council moved faster than either speeches or reforms. They were careful and cold. They wanted to close the Leviathan's influence and to protect old structures. The veteran engineer did not stop at the ledger. He kept decoding and found a final line of code that did not hide words so much as point to a place coordinates buried inside layers of failing script, like a whispered name under a cloak. The numbers glowed briefly on his screen and he stared at them until his eyes blurred. He fed them into a star tracker and watched a point on the edge of council space blink into place, a silent station that did not answer hails, a place that had been written out of public maps. The engineer's hands shook as he turned to the captain and said, quietly, "I think this is why they feared us," and then he read the coordinate again. The station at the edge of council maps hung in the sky like a fossil, a ring of shadow and cold metal that had been written out of many histories, and when the Leviathan's boarding team latched to its old docking clamps they felt a wet, quiet smell of dust and burned paint, because places that fall out of maps keep the dust of the time they were left in. Inside, the air tasted thin and the lights flickered, and murals faded along the corridor told stories built by hands that no longer answered. The murals showed crowds gathered for food, machines that once fed cities, and lists of names that had stopped growing. As the humans walked through halls that had held voices and then silence, they found rooms with consoles that had been smashed and little gardens that had been buried under sheets of ash. Metal shelves still held tools someone had left in a hurry, and a child's toy lay under a radiator like a small accusation. The team split into two groups because that is what boarding teams do, one to search the external systems and one to pry through records, and the slow work of reading old codes began with the patient fingers of a veteran who had seen too many false reports and wanted the truth to look honest. He found logs tucked behind burn marks, files that had been copied and hidden like seeds in winter. The logs were not neat or proud but messy with apology and calculation, and they showed programs that said they were for aid but that were written to steer weather and markets and unrest on tiny levers where only a few knew the keys. The words on the screen were plain enough: sequences that nudged a harvest toward failure, scripts that delayed help until a price was paid, commands that cooperated with silent banks to move food away from towns the council had decided to starve. Each log had a timestamp and a name and a file of why the action had been taken, always with a careful, cold note about stability and long-term order. The team read and the sound of their quiet feet filled the empty rooms while the idea that those decisions had been made in the name of safety sank into them like cold water. The murals began to make sad sense. The smiling faces were not only memories but evidence of a history someone had tried to control. The Leviathan's veteran felt anger bright and honest, but he also felt a weight that asked for a careful answer, not a shout, because the people who had suffered needed repair more than vengeance. They decided to take the evidence out of the dark. They copied the files and made a plain, honest package: logs, names, coordinates, and the little picture of the child's hand holding a tool that had first flown on the Leviathan's channel. The captain did not want a hidden revenge. He wanted to offer repair and truth. He made a plan that matched their best stories: open the station's archive to the public, to scholars, and to those who had been hurt, and to offer repair teams and seeds and engineers who would work under cameras and under the law. It was a dangerous move because truth can burn, but truth also clears the ground for rebuilding. The Leviathan broadcast the findings on neutral feeds with a message that spoke plainly: we found this, we will help fix what was broken. The files rolled across the galaxy and did something the captain had hoped for and feared at once: they broke the neat picture the council had shown the worlds and they let small voices speak loudly. Cities that had been ignored sent messages and names. Families who had lost farms sent their slow, bitter thanks. Some council members read the logs and felt shame like a hand on their faces, others read them and put their hands over papers, calling the leaks lies and asking for censorship. Across markets and plazas, people who had not trusted the council began to demand answers and repairs. The Leviathan's offer to turn the silent station into a shared archive and a repair hub sounded to many like a reason to finally make things right. To others it sounded like the last straw from a people who had the gall to name what had been kept secret. In back rooms the council's cautious wing argued for investigation in public. The secret committee that favored old power moved faster. They were careful in ways that made the captain think of old predators. Quiet envoys came to pirate leaders and merchants and whispered deals that smelled of old money. The secret committee planned to regain control not by argument but by preventing the truth from being shared. They voted in private to send a strike force with a legal warrant to seize the station and to cut its comms at a moment when public eyes were on the feed, and they arranged for the legal papers to look precise and clean so no one would notice the hand that guided them. While the Leviathan's broadcasts still ran and repair teams began to gather tools, the strike force slid out of council lanes with the hush of a storm. The captain read the notice of pending boarding and felt the old drum in his chest that had powered him through worse nights. He ordered the hold sealed and the crews to their stations and asked for one last message to be kept in the open channels. In the mess hall, a woman who had become a mother on the Leviathan pressed a small, shaky voice message she had recorded months before into a file and sent it out to loop across neutral feeds. It was the child's voice again, smaller now and bright with the simple truth of why they had left their world: remember why we came. The message rolled across screens and warmed many like a small fire. The very last sound on the station's open channel was that child's voice, and then everything went dark as boarding shuttles dropped from the black and locked their clamps into place. Boarding began at dawn like a slow, hard rain because the council had law and numbers and the Leviathan had people who had nothing left to lose, and the first clash was quiet and close where loud guns would have broken more than steel. The council's strike teams moved in with legal warrants and practiced faces, stepping through airlocks like men who had read every rule about how to take a ship. The humans met them with the tools of a life lived on the edge, nets that wrapped a weapon mount instead of blowing it off, magnetic clamps that locked a targeting array safe, and trained hands that cut power to turrets without cutting life support. The fight was not a movie of explosions. It was hands and breath and small clever things that hurt only what they needed to. Humans unrolled padded barriers and caught charging booted officers in soft traps that left no scars. They jammed sensors with music and noise that made targeting miss like a man missing a step on a dance floor. They moved like people who had learned to steal minutes from storms and give them to children. The council soldiers were skilled, but they had not trained for mercy as a tactic. Videos from inside the hull that leaked to neutral feeds showed alien sailors trapped under collapsing girders and human crews cutting them out and handing them oxygen. The side turned votes in the middle of a fight because cameras and law are slow to change what a living face can show. Diplomats raced through channels while hull plates screamed from impact and shouted. Lawyers in the council argued that force could not be used if both sides tried to save the same life. The Leviathan's captain ordered his people to disable, not to kill, and to carry out anyone hurt by the boarding. That order made some soldiers angry and made others think. In a cramped corridor, a council admiral watched a human nurse press a bandage to his arm and hand him his water with a calm look that did not gloat. He felt something like shame and something like a new idea. While fists and nets did the first work, talks and calls did the rest. Representatives from small worlds who had seen what the Leviathan did called for a public reckoning that could end the battle. A judge on the council who had grown tired of old balances and new suffering sat at his table and watched the feeds until his hands stilled. He remembered the law as a book and the law as a life. The child's voice that had looped across feeds for days came on again in the background, asking a plain question that broke through the noise: why do you think you can take what you did not build? The judge held the question like a coin and turned it. He found himself writing not just a punishment but a new measure that used the force of law to protect the weak and to reward repair. Votes moved like shifting sand. Some council members wanted the Leviathan's crew punished to the full measure. Some wanted the carrier destroyed for showing how it could hide and move and change history. Others wanted treaties and seats at tables where old rules had once refused them. The vote that came was not perfect, but it was a change. The council rewrote accession law so that fleets built for rescue, stations open to repair, and movements that saved lives could be grounds for membership and for protections, not only for war and conquest. The Leviathan was fined for breaking procedures and ordered to open certain logs to inspection. The human captain accepted fines with a silence that said more than words. The old conspirators who had tried to hide the ledger and who had plotted bribes and secret strikes found exile and loss of credentials instead of the iron that some feared. The secret committee splintered and the public eyes that had watched the boarding did not forget. The carrier kept its hull and most of its people. It kept its right to fly and to teach the invisible line for peaceful uses under agreed oversight. In the mess halls people cried and cleaned and made tea and told small, sharp stories about the night they had all been ugly and then saved one another from that ugliness. Children who had watched from safe decks learned words like law and mercy at once and then learned how to be braver. The Leviathan prepared to leave council space as a new kind of ship, fined, watched, but still proud. Allies it had earned along the way stepped forward with offers of ports and work and places where a repaired fleet could rest. As the carrier slid out of the mapped lanes and into corridors where maps still hung faint on old screens, a small ping came from the deep behind council borders like the tick of an old clock. The science officer read the return and his face changed because numbers on a screen cannot make a sound like a human voice, but they can move a heart just the same. The probe had returned a reading, an unknown mass, inbound, moving on a course that would cross the Leviathan's new path in months not years. The captain leaned on the rail and smiled the tired smile of someone who had been laughed at and then had to make a case for life. He said softly to his crew, "Here we go again." The Leviathan's engines warmed and the carrier slid into the dark like a thing that had changed rules and made new friends, and the galaxy watched and waited, because when people who have nothing to lose step into the wide night, they sometimes remind everyone else why the rules were written in the first place and why rules must learn to blink back.